like all cities, Kampala has developed as Uganda has formed. When the explorers came here, Speke and then eventually Barton and many others, they would come to the court of the Kabaka. The Kabaka of Buganda, when the first person came, was in Banda here. When Speke came, it was in Rubaga. Now, the Baganda called the seat of the kingdom, where the king sat, a Kibuga. So the Kibuga of Kabaka then was Rubaga. In the tradition of Baganda, whenever a new Kabaka came, he would choose which hill he preferred. So each one of those kings preferred a different thing. So when the British came here, and religions came also, some very interesting things happened. We got religious wars, we got pull and push. So what Kabaka Mwanga did, he gave the Anglican Namirembe, he gave the Catholics Rubaga, and he gave the Muslims Kiburi. And then the English-speaking Catholics were given in Zambia, the Mill Hill Fathers. A very interesting setting up. That virtually is the foundation. By then, the East African Trading Company with Captain Lugard had already been positioned at Old Kampala, and they had a fort there on top of Old Kampala. In fact, it was called Lugard Fort, those who know the history of Kampala. And then Nakasero. There was also a place. So Nakasero and Old Kampala virtually formed the foundation of Kampala. Initially, it was a town council of Kampala and Old Kampala. And eventually, as we approached independence, we had Kampala municipality and Mengo municipality, where the seat of the Kabaka was, virtually the whole of, more or less like the whole of Rubaga division now, was Mengo municipality, with a little bit of Makinde then. So that is the formation of Kampala and how it comes about. So when they talk about the 7 hills, they talk about the original, where you had Old Kampala, you had Nakasero, okay? And then the hills not very far from there, there were 7 of them. So it is Old Kampala, Rubaga, Namirembe, I think Nakololo, Nakasero, and one more. Those formed the 7 hills. But actually it was more, to me, those who said 7 hills, I did not agree with them, but that is what they said. To me, I vividly remember we had Kiburi. Then when you went around, you had Rubaga. When you went around, you had Namirembe. Went around, you had Makerere. And then when you came, you had Old Kampala and Nakasero and Kololo. Yeah, Mengo is, you see, when I talk about Mengo, sometimes I get lost because Mengo was not really that high compared to their hills. A little bit lower than Namirembe, a little bit lower than, but it is a hill. So really, that is part of it. That's one of them also. So to me, I don't know where the people stopped on 7 hills, because to me it looks like those are the hills which were there then. And the Europeans who were in the administration of then the colonial government stayed in Nakasero and Entebbe. The Indians, who were the main traders, stayed in Old Kampala. And a little bit of around Kamocha area. You know the Kamocha area? Near Mulago there, coming down, that area, you had a lot of Asians in there. And then you take Bukoto Street, you know that Bukoto Street, and the other one is Kanjucha Street. Those were also strictly Asian. And you can even see the architecture of those houses. Those were Asian architecture. So that is how Kampala basically was during my time. A lot of Africans stayed in Rubaga, yeah, in Kiburi. A lot of them stayed in Kawempe, also towards Kawempe. And we had, and this is where I sometimes do not probably agree with it, Naguru Hill, where we are now, where they have the church, the Catholic church, just next to it we had an estate called Naguru Nakawa Estate. And those were workers of government who were given that estate, modern. They were modern. In fact, a lot of our leaders at the time who were they were in unions. They lived here. They lived in Naguru Estate and Nakawa. It had a historical background. A lot of middle class Ugandans actually lived in those who came away outside Buganda, especially workers. I think even Obote one time lived in this Naguru Estate, including a man called Luanda and a few others. Now, that to me was the Kampala which I knew. So the 7 hills, it can be contestable also. Which one do you want to talk about? Because to me, the real foundation of Kampala was Old Kampala, Nakasero, and eventually Kololo. That is what I would call Kampala municipality, which was the initial municipality of Kampala. Then the one up Namirembe and Rubaga would be, and Mengo. That one would be Mengo municipality. And Makere, of course, now you can see. Where do you live, Makere? You can see it's obviously part of the Kampala municipality. Because municipality of Kampala gave service to Makere University. And then, of course, you had Kololo. And then you had Mulago. Okay? Mulago was, in fact, was a central government hospital. Now, there was another hospital in Nakasero. They called it the European Hospital, where the UTV used to be, near Nakasero Church. But you can see how Nakasero was built. You had the Governor's Lodge, you had All Saints Church, you had Radio Uganda, where Radio Uganda went, that was a European hospital. And then you had the Armory. And Captain Lugard also had a fort there. Next to those, where now we have the toll hotel, what, Pearl Hotel? Yeah, that one. Now, that used to be, in fact, when we were young, we used to go past the All Saints Church. Behind All Saints, there was a very big park called Mutineers Park. A lot of people would go there on Sunday, all the way up to Fairway. Now, that is basically what Kampala was then. But as I told you, a lot of people who worked in Kampala lived in suburbs. And the suburbs were expanding. And they kept on expanding. So the biggest suburb, which is Makindye, and Rubaga, and Kawempe, were the African residents. Luckily, we were lucky here. They were called little townships. And most of them actually fell under Mengo, because Kampala stopped at a certain point for the normal services. Wandegea and things like that. A little bit past Wandegea. Mulago was in the center, obviously, because central government looked after it. So that is what Kampala was. At independence, they wanted Kampala to become a city, so the 2 municipalities were virtually combined to make a city. And that became Kampala City. That was at independence.
There is this argument that the original capital city of Uganda was Entebbe. How did they shift?
You see, what is the capital city? That's where the seat of government is. Who was staying in Entebbe? It was the governor. Yeah? And they say that is what the governor, that's, in fact, some ministries, until very recently, were in Entebbe. Agriculture, Ministry of Works. Yeah, agriculture, works, and many others. So that is basically the administrative city at the time. Now, when they built parliament, because the first parliament, Legicor, was the present city council. Then the British built the present parliament. When parliament came here, the governor had the lodge at Nakasero, but spent most of his time in Entebbe. One, Entebbe had the airport. Two, the British preferred that kind of ambience. But that's around independence, because of the parliament and because of even the the club for the top civil servant was near State Lodge. It was called Uganda Club. And then we had the Kampala Club, remember? And in fact, most of the European civil servant, where you have now Nile Hotel, was actually the field for Kampala Club. That's where they played cricket. That's why they did everything. So really, Kampala eventually, at independence, became the capital. The governor, of course, was about to leave. They knew within a year the governor would be gone. And the prime minister, they initially found accommodation for him, and eventually he went to Entebbe State House when the governor left. The Ugandans, the natives, as the British called them, they preferred to stay in their areas. They owned land. By the way, 70 to 80% of the land in Kampala is owned by indigenous people. And apart from the Kampala, where the king gave the central government 3 cities and gave them, I think, 52 square miles: Kampala, Entebbe, and Masaka. All right? Now, apart from that area where the government of Kabaka had given these people land, the rest of the land outside belonged to the Kabaka and his officials. So, what was the housing was okay. In fact, the slums, or what you call, what people now have named them ghetto, the slums, most of the people who stayed there, they were actually not Baganda. They came from outside. For example, Kisenyi had a lot of people from Bukoba. Yeah? And then you had, you'll hear a place called Kinyoro. A lot of people came from outside Kampala. There was Kinyoro, there's Kitoro in Entebbe. Most of them came from those areas. So people who came from outside these cities went to those areas. The housing for the people who worked for government was good, very good. In fact, at independence, if you were left Makerere, you went into a house and you went to work in the government. The people outside those areas I've mentioned lived in houses which belonged to those people who owned land. They also owned houses, so people could rent them. The Asians also owned houses. They lived in them. They had flats. They had all sorts of things. So remember, at that time, the Kampala was supposed to have nearly about 150,000 people only. And most of them were coming from outside that Kampala we are talking about to work. And during the day, so the buses we had from Kampala would be Mulago, Mengo, you'd have Kawempe, you'd have Natete, you'd have Port Bell, then you'd have Kira. That was a very popular bus. So a lot of people lived that side. So those buses tell you where people, and Gayaza. So with those buses, they were KDS, Kampala District Service, and UTC, they had that. So those buses virtually told you where people lived. And the bus park was down near the taxi park, and it was a government bus park where the buses would come and then travel to those places. For example, the one from Mengo would come with this coming down on Blue Room and whatnot, and come up to the bus park. People would come, other would go in, then to go around, come to near where the ShopRite is now, the lower ShopRite, come up near where the Nakasero Market is, was called Hussein, come up on Kampala Road and follow Bank of Uganda, and go all the way on Hoima Road and come to Wandegea, then turn and go up to Old Mulago, where Old Mulago is now. Now, that told you what sort of people that bus served. And now you had a hospital at Mengo, you had a hospital at Nsambia, you had a hospital at Rubaga, and then you had Mulago Hospital. Those were missionary hospitals, and eventually much later, Kibuli also got a hospital. The schools, which were mainly, and this can tell you what, Nakasero Primary School was strictly for Europeans. Kitante eventually also came as a European school. Then Buganda Road was Norman Godino, was mainly for Indians and Goans. Then you go down, you had Ramungaria. Those were the singer-singers. Kara-singers, as they call them. Then you went to Nakivubo Blue, which is near the clock tower. You had the Indian school on one side, which was called Nakivubo then, primary school. And then city council, on this side where Owino now sits, they built Nakivubo settlement. There was the people who owned that land. They went to city council, they gave them land, and they put their Nakivubo settlement, mainly for indigenous children. The real African schools, which were established, the oldest one, is Mengo Primary School by the Anglican Church. Then there was Rubaga. Then there was in Zambia. Rubaga had both girls and boys, and a secondary school. In Zambia had the same. St. Peter's, there was a boarding school for girls. Those are the people who actually provided schools for our indigenous people. Now, the other schools which were boarding were outside Kampala. Then there was Makerere Demonstration School, which is Makerere College School. Then you had Shimoni Demonstration School, because they had a TTC. So those are the kind of things that give you the picture of what Kampala was. Kiburi also started their school. They had a primary and a secondary and a TTC. So this is Kampala for you. The others came afterwards. What I'm trying to say is that apart from not being a colony like Kenya, there was a small dichotomy initially, Europeans and Indians and Africans, but eventually it was easier to merge because there wasn't that much Calabar then here. The European took a little bit longer, but most of their children would go to Kenya because in Kenya the European schools were much more stronger than here. Makerere University, of course, one of the best, the whole of East Africa. Most of the East Africans came here for studies in Makerere. In fact, if you went to Makerere, in some of those halls you see, Sheraton would not be as good. They were very, very good. We had very good people coming here. So that is Kampala for you. Of course, there was Nakivubo Channel, which you know of. Now, Nakivubo Stadium, that whole area with Nakivubo Primary School, Nakivubo Settlement, there was no Wino then. The new Wino is a very new thing. Came all the way up to Nakivubo. Nakivubo crossed over the road, going to Namirembe, crossed over the road and went, that place was a cricket ground, where you have the new taxi park. All the way, those were grounds. Remember, the Indians were staying up. There was a Koja Mosque, which is a Ismailia Mosque. So most of those Asians played their cricket down there. That's how Kampala was. It was not congested. We did not have that many people. The best market, of course, was Nakasero. By the way it was then still is the same. They haven't, maybe a few little buildings, the lock-up shop behind. But it was virtually the only market. Then you had, of course, Kibuye Market. Kisenyi had a market inside there. There was a market at Bakuri. And they had a market at Nankurabye. A market in Wandegea. So those are the kind of things we had around town. Mainly town, Kampala Road, and you take William Street, you take Market Street, what you call Loom Street now. All those were shops. Mainly, by the way, by our indigenous, our Asians who were here. They claim that this area was a hunting ground for the Kabaka of Buganda. So the Europeans came and said, oh, there's a lot of impala in the area you've given us. So the Baganda called it Impala, and eventually it became Kampala. Evolved from the animal, the impala, into Kampala. Others have said, I mean, this might be mythology, that one time Kabaka was hunting, and then because it is a hill, and they said, the man said, Sabasaji, how do you feel? And he said, Akasozi Kampala Wara, meaning the hill is controlling me. That is the Baganda version of it, some of them. But I think the Impala one sounds a little bit much more, because the British could never pronounce certain thing correctly. So it's out of the word Impala.